Prime Minister Modi has wrapped up his Poland visit and is now headed to Ukraine, where the focus remains on bringing peace and stability. But let's take a quick look at the Prime Minister's Poland visit before we discuss the significance of his next stop.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's European diplomatic push. His visit to Poland is a first by an Indian Prime Minister in over 4 decades. The Prime Minister received a rousing welcome as he landed in Warsaw, with the members of Indian Diaspora community gathering in large numbers just to catch a glimpse of the Prime Minister.
So you got a picture here. You met the Prime Minister today?
Yes. I even got his autograph for my daughter's photo.
Okay, so you got an autograph from Narendra Modi himself?
Yes, sir. Yes.
During his visit, Prime Minister Modi also paid tributes at the monument to the Battle of Monte Cassino in Warsaw. This monument commemorates the sacrifice and valor of soldiers from Poland, India, and other countries who fought alongside each other in the famous Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy during the Second World War. And at this venue too, Indians gathered to welcome the Prime Minister.
We are very excited. We feel super proud and extremely lucky to see him.
So what is one thing that you would like to tell the Prime Minister?
Thank you for making India what it is now. The last 10 years have been mind-blowing and we're super grateful.
The excitement among the Indian community in Poland was palpable, but there were some who had flown from other countries as well to hear the Prime Minister.
Saiba, you are here in Warsaw from London. What brings you to Warsaw?
The Prime Minister. I think his aura just drags everyone towards him. I think I was one of those people. I will be following him. I mean, I'll be tailing him as much as I possibly can. But then the idea was to hear him. There's a lot of motivation that one gets when he's talking about the country and what he has a vision for the country. So I'll definitely be attending his event at the Sheraton because that's more of a speech.
On the streets of Warsaw, you'll also encounter a cafe named Chai Wala, whose owners are Indians hailing from Gujarat, and they say that the name of the cafe is inspired from the Prime Minister himself.
Thousands of miles away from the streets of India, we are here in Warsaw, where the Chai Wala brings the street food of India to Warsaw. जब से प्रधानमंत्री बने नरेंद्र मोदी जब प्रधानमंत्री बने तब से चाय वाला ये रेस्टोरेंट भी 3-4 साल पुराना है. क्या कोई कनेक्शन है प्रधानमंत्री का और चाय वाला नाम रखने का?
दिल से दिल का कनेक्शन है. इनसे ही हम इंस्पायर हुए और चाय वाला नाम रखा हुआ है.
The Prime Minister also received a grand ceremonial welcome and held bilateral talks with his Polish counterpart.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, joining us at the moment is Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert, as well as Alexander Kara, former Ukrainian diplomat. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Brahma Chalani, how significant is this visit in your view? It's the first, of course, visit to Ukraine by the Prime Minister and, of course, in that sense, at a time when he has already visited Russia, making this visit that much more important. Brahma Chalani.
This is the first visit by the Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine since that country became independent. So from that aspect, it's quite significant from a symbolic viewpoint. But we should not forget that just about 2 months ago, Zelensky and Modi met on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Italy, and they held detailed discussions both on bilateral issues as well as on the conflict in Ukraine. And in that 2-month period since that last meeting, the prospects for a ceasefire in the Ukraine war have actually become almost zero. The recent military actions by Ukraine, the incursion into Russia, the drone attack day yesterday on Moscow, have actually dashed hopes of any ceasefire. And also, more importantly, the Americans are not at the moment interested in a ceasefire. There'll be clarity in American foreign policy in regard to the Ukraine war after the November presidential election in the US. So had Modi visited Ukraine later in the year, in the second half of November or in December, there would have been at least greater clarity in terms of American approach.
Right.
At the moment, the Americans are not interested in a ceasefire, and therefore it begs the question as to what Modi can achieve from this visit.
Right. In fact, let me take that question across to Alexander Khara. Alexander Khara, I'm just going to quote what the Prime Minister had said earlier. In fact, Prime Minister Modi had stated that whether it's war, conflict or terrorist attack, anyone who believes in humanity feels pain by the loss of lives. However, when innocent children are killed, the hearts bleed and pain is very terrifying. The big question is that after the Prime Minister also stating in the past that now is on a time of war, is there any real expectation of a mediation or a larger role that India can play given its diplomatic ties with both Russia and Ukraine?
First of all, Premier Minister Modi is welcome in Ukraine and certainly will like India very much. Unfortunately, we don't like very much the policy of the current government that is not siding with international law, it's not siding with Ukraine, is not pushing Russia to stop the genocidal war. And it doesn't matter that American thinks about ceasefire in Ukraine or Europeans. We are not ready in Ukraine because a ceasefire would mean that Russia may replenish its stockpiles, reforms their forces and continue this genocidal war against us. And certainly when we were a bit disappointed that India, even though took part in the peace summit in Switzerland just a couple of weeks ago, but did not sign the final communique of this summit. And I don't think that Premier Minister Modi has any idea how to serve this mediation role, noble role of a peacemaker between Russia that he is trying to deep cooperation with and trade and even in the military, and Ukraine that is an object of this aggression. So I don't think that he will change anything, even though certainly this visit of a significant importance for Ukraine.
So you don't think that, no, but then what is the significance, sir? If you feel that nothing is going to come out in terms of a concrete outcome, why is it significant then, Mr. Khara?
Well, certainly we can try to pursue Mr. Modi to be more vocal on condemning Russia, and I believe he will not do this for the reason that, $65 billion trade war with Russia, 36% of import of weapons comes from Russia. $30 billion is something that India saved on cheap Russian oil and re-export of the Russian oil. So I don't think these factors, including the idea to balance between Russia and the West, between China and Russia, will wage and will bring some ideas how Mr. Modi can play. But we can talk to him, we can pursue that we have a plan, peace plan, which is nothing more than to restore the action of the international law, norms and principles of international law. And
right.
Certainly we would love to enhance our cooperation with India in trade and other aspects.
Ramachalani, the question is this, that, while the Prime Minister has visited Russia recently, the beginning of the tour itself, we're hearing all sorts of, doomsday scenarios. But the larger question is this, is there really some kind of move forward? We've heard what the Polish Prime Minister Tusk has said in the joint statement about India playing a major role in peace talks. You've referred to the timing of it being all wrong. But the larger question is that, is there any possibility of a move forward? Are you looking at any concrete outcome at all from this tour?
The military situation is virtually at a stalemate. There isn't going to be much territorial change in this war. It's a war of attrition. Now, the issue is, at what point will the parties be ready for a ceasefire? If you take the Korean War reached a stalemate around July 1951. It took 2 years before an armistice agreement, a ceasefire agreement, could be reached. Now, the longer it takes to reach a ceasefire agreement in the Ukraine war, the greater will be the devastation that Ukraine will face. Ukraine is facing major issues. Look at its demographic profile. The number of young males has decreased to such an extent that many on the front lines who are fighting, defending the country, are beyond the age of 40 or so. So there are these important issues that Ukraine faces, and also there are all these more basic issues, because Ukraine is at war. Zelensky is not holding elections. Zelensky's term as president ended in May. Now it's more than 3 months since his term ended, and he's staying in office despite not holding elections. Now the fact is that he is not only staying in power without holding elections beyond his term, he has also clamped down on independent media outlets. He has jailed his political opponents. He has banned political groups. So this kind of political atmosphere is not good for Ukraine, its civil society. There should be open debate in Ukraine. There should be greater engagement of civil society in issues of national security. This is only possible if there is a ceasefire. So it's in Ukraine's own interest, domestically, in terms of being able to recoup from the devastation, that there be a ceasefire. And I think that particular movement, that traction toward a ceasefire, is only possible once there is clarity in American policy, because the road to peace in Ukraine, let's face it, lies through Washington.
Mr. Khara, I think you should respond to that, because I think that's a very, very valid set of concerns that Mr. Chelani has posed here. Of course, it's our Indian perspective here that, any time is a good time for peace. Now is not a time for wars, a position that India has repeatedly reiterated, but larger questions of internal democracy, of a free press, and the fact that ultimately it will have to be a ceasefire from either side, from both the sides, that will be perhaps the starting point of peace, because otherwise we are looking at a situation where each side continues to, stand eyeball to eyeball and no one blinks.
Well, first of all, we do not trust any word of Mr. Putin and his government. Because in 2014, Russia illegally annexed Crimea, and actually India abstained during the General Assembly's vote back in 2014. So he annexed Crimea, and he started the proxy war on Donbass. And we were trying to negotiate a peaceful settlement with Russia, and they were not interested in that, because they wanted to limit our sovereignty and our choice to choose our allies to be members of European Union and NATO. Then they re-invaded in 2022 with the aim to eradicate Ukrainian statehood and Ukrainian nation, because the political leadership of Russia believes that there is no such a nation like Ukrainians. So it's a genocidal intent. And I cannot imagine, I haven't heard in history a moment when diplomacy could stop genocidal war. We cannot pause this war just to re-elect the president. I'm not a big fan of Mr. Zelensky, but I'm fully behind him, because he is a leader, a wartime leader, and he is guiding our country and protecting our the very existence. That's why all this criticism, to some extent, it's fair. And possibly Zelensky may lose the next elections. But now we cannot afford, just like to have a pause and to provide Russia this opportunity
there are
to
Ukrainian concerns, there are concerns of the West, there are concerns of the East, there are multiple concerns at play over here. But larger question is whether the Prime Minister's visit is going to come up with some kind of a concrete step, and whether there are any steps that are going to be taken globally by the larger Committee of Nations in restoring peace, because the continued and protracted war certainly isn't in the interest of the world at large. Thanks so much, Brahma Chelani and Alexander Khara, for joining us this evening.